of Acts chapter 12. I'm going to begin reading at verse 1, Acts chapter 12. About that time, King Herod laid violent hands upon some who belonged to the church. He had James, the brother of John, killed with the sword. After he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the festival of unleavened bread. When he had seized him, he put him in prison and handed him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending to bring him out to the people after Passover. While Peter was kept in prison, the church prayed fervently to God for him. The very night before Herod was going to bring him out, Peter, bound with 2 chains, was sleeping between 2 soldiers, while guards in front of the door were keeping watch over the prison. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He tapped Peter on the side and woke him, saying, "Get up quickly," and the chains fell off his wrists. The angel said to him, "Fasten your belt and put on your sandals." So he did so. Then he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." Peter went out and followed him. He did not realize that what was happening with the angel's help was real. He thought he was seeing a vision. After they had passed the first and the second guard, they came before the iron gate leading into the city. It opened for them of its own accord, and they went outside and walked along a lane, when suddenly the angel left him. Then Peter came to himself and said, "Now I am sure that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hands of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting." As soon as he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose other name was Mark, where many had gathered and were praying. When he knocked at the outer gate, a maid named Rhoda came to answer. On recognizing Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed that, instead of opening the gate, she ran in and announced that Peter was standing at the gate. They said to her, "You're out of your mind." But she insisted that it was so. They said, "It is his angel." Meanwhile, Peter continued knocking, and when they opened the gate, they saw him and were amazed. He motioned to them with his hand to be silent and described for them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he added, "Tell this to James and to the believers." Then he left and went to another place. When morning came, there was no small commotion among the soldiers over what had become of Peter. When Herod had searched for him and could not find him, he examined the guards and ordered them to be put to death. Then he went down from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there. You know, immediately after Stephen's martyrdom in chapter 7, verse 4 of chapter 8, there was persecution that broke out among the disciples, and they scattered, and as they did, the church expanded outside of Jerusalem into Judea and Samaria, along the Mediterranean coast. But then the persecution kind of died down after that, and now we see it picking up again. And in fact, it's a kind of a truism that whenever the church is persecuted, it expands. I remember one time hearing Howard Hendricks say that it's the second law of the spiritual second law of thermodynamics. The greater the heat, the greater the expansion. And the church expanded in the midst of persecution, and we'll begin to see that take place through the Apostle Paul and his missionary journeys beginning in this next chapter, chapter 13. But this persecution was probably connected to the expansion of the gospel to the Gentiles. You see, even Jewish believers had a hard time wrapping their hands around the fact that a Gentile could become a Christian without first becoming a Jew. They couldn't handle that a Gentile could become a Christian as a Gentile. And the Jews, of course, hated the idea of the expansion of Christianity. And also probably the thought that traditional Judaism may be superseded by a much larger Gentile Christianity. And Stephen actually alluded to that in his message before he was martyred. In fact, probably the reason he was martyred. And Herod, it seems, was attuned to the fact that there was unrest among Jews toward Christians. And Herod, being the tetrarch or the ruler over this area, wanted to please the Jews. And so he probably arrested James and had him put to death as a test to see what the reaction might be. And of course, someone told him that, hey, the Jews were pleased with that. So he decided to arrest Peter as well. Now remember, that when you think of the 12 apostles, they're really kind of there's this sort of three at the top tier, you might say, of Peter, James, and John. They were the ones who were closest to Jesus, who were there on the Mount of Transfiguration. Now James has been put to death, and that pleased the Jews, so Herod decides to arrest the next person, Peter, and have him put in prison, and intending to put him to death. However, it's the Feast of the Passover, and so he wants to follow the rules for that, the religious rules, and decides to wait till after Passover to have him put to death. But that is certainly his intention at this point. It's interesting now that Luke, in writing this account, describes just how well Peter was guarded here. I mean, it's amazing that he says he's four squads of soldiers to guard him. And later it says he was bound with chains to the soldiers on each side. I mean, he's treated like public enemy number one. This guy isn't a murderer. The public has nothing to fear from Peter. Why all the security? Well, because he was, according to the view of Jewish people, a threat to public order here because of what he was preaching. And it kind of reminds me of the situation when Jesus was arrested and Pilate offers a choice to the people. I can release Barabbas or I can release Jesus. Barabbas was a zealot and a murderer. He was a threat to the people. But Jesus was a threat to the public order. He was turning the world upside down with his preaching. And in that case, in the case there and also the case here, truth is more dangerous than an individual criminal out there. Now, what's Peter's reaction to all this? He's sleeping. He's arrested, and he knows, probably anticipates what's about to happen because of what happened to James, that he's going to be put to death. And we find him here the night before he was probably be executed, and he's sleeping soundly. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think I'd be, if I knew that the next day was probably going to be it. I'm not sure. But Peter, and if you think about Peter, later he wrote his epistle. And in that letter he says, cast all your anxieties upon him because he cares for you. Apparently Peter put that into practice in his own life. He's sleeping between these two soldiers. Now, there's some humorous elements to this whole account here, and I think this is one of them, where the angel comes in, and actually the text doesn't do justice to it here. It says he tapped Peter on the side. Now, the word literally means he's to strike. It's like Peter was sound asleep, and this angel had to, in fact, not only is the word normally translated strike, but it's a participle here, indicating that's sort of a repeated action. It's like Peter. Peter must be one of these sound sleepers. Maybe you're one of those people that just can't wake up. And here's the angel tapping him. Peter, get up. Peter, get up. Get up. Get on your coat and sandals. And I can imagine Peter waking up, and if you're one of those people, if you've been woken up from a sound sleep, you're not sure what's going on. You feel like you're walking in your sleep. And that's kind of the picture I get here of Peter walking out, because it says he thought he was having a vision. He didn't know really what was going on. He's just kind of following this angel along, walking out. And it wasn't until the angel disappeared and he finds himself outside here that he realized it's real. This is really happening. I read a story about this Indian evangelist, Sundar Singh. If any of you watch golf, you've heard of Vijay Singh. Well, it's the same last name, Sundar Singh. He was an evangelist from India. He was witnessing in Nepal, and he was told not to witness in this particular village, but he was anyway, and he was arrested, and he was put into a dry well. There's a well had no water in it. He put down in that well, a lid was put over it and locked. And the authorities were intending for him to die there because they weren't planning to feed him. In fact, this man, Sundar, was actually sitting on bones of other people who had been put down there. And he's in that dry well praying, when suddenly he hears the lid opening and a rope being let down, and the rope had a loop in it, so he put his foot in the loop and was pulled up. And when he got up to the top to get out, he looked around, there was nobody there. And he thought, well, somebody didn't want to be seen trying to get me out. And so but the thing that really got him was when he turned around, the lid was back on the well and locked. Well, he went back preaching to the same village, was arrested again, brought before the same authorities, and they were questioning him, and they were wondering how he got out. So they were asking about the key. They thought there was somebody there that had stole the key and got him out. But when they looked around, it was on the belt loop of the priest who was questioning him, where it had always been. And it was at that point that he knew that God had rescued him. Now, there are some lessons in deliverance here, I believe, that are important for us to get a hold of. And this passage certainly teaches us to trust God, yet not presume upon Him. I think Peter's deliverance here, you notice, came at the last moment. I mean, the Feast of Unleavened Bread lasts for some time. God could have delivered him at any point along that time, but it was the night before he was to be put to death that God delivered him. And oftentimes that's the case. God waits till the very last minute to deliver us. And I believe the reason is that he's leading us to trust him for the outcome, no matter what it is. That we trust him. It's kind of like the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and being tossed in the fire. They said, God may save us and he may not, but regardless of whether he does or not, our trust is in him. We're not bowing down to your idol. And that's what God's after. He wants us to trust him in advance for whatever may come about. If you've, I noticed in the insert today, there's the Church Around the World, and there's an article on the front page that says, Christian acquitted of blasphemy charge in Pakistan. It's another instance of God delivering this person who was arrested for some Muslim boys were beating up on his nephew because the nephew hadn't converted to Islam. And his uncle rescued him from that incident. And a mob came to his house and said, bring out the blasphemer. He was accused of saying things against Islam, which of course weren't true. But he says at the end of this, during my imprisonment, he said, I kept on telling God that I had complete faith in him and would wait for the day when he would set me free. And that may be physical freedom, and it may be spiritual freedom. It's going to be freedom one way or the other. The other thing about this experience here is that the experience of Peter must be balanced with the experience of James. I mean, James wasn't rescued. James was put to death. So, God is sovereign in our lives. And in some cases, He chooses to bring glory to himself through the life of a person. And in some cases, he chooses to bring glory to himself